The Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth. But if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything, but is thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under the bushel basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have come not to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." The gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
You may be seated. I still vividly remember the time 50 plus years ago when I first came to Faith Lutheran Church in Okemos. I was in high school, and I came with my mother to this place for a gathering of the Michigan District ALCW, the American Lutheran Church Women. I clearly remember that day because Evelyn Frost was the speaker. And I know there are some of you who are longtime members who remember her. I'm sure Ledith remembers Evelyn Frost and some other people probably as well. Evelyn's remarks on that day made a huge impression on my young, formidable mind. The gospel passage on which she spoke was the gospel reading that we have today. And I remember being absolutely fascinated as she talked about salt, the many properties and varieties of salt, and the multiple ways in which salt is used. As I studied today's gospel reading, that experience of roughly 50 years ago came to mind. Salt and light. Today, Jesus tells us we are the salt of the earth, and we bring light to the world. Last week, we heard him begin his inaugural address, the message we now call the Sermon on the Mount. And as he began, he shared with us what we now call the Beatitudes, and Rich was wonderful in the way he proclaimed that message last week. That wonderful vision that lifts up the most unlikely people, the poor in spirit, the meek and merciful, those who mourn, and those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, those who are pure in heart, the peacemakers, and the persecuted. Last week we heard Jesus call these, the most unlikely of people, blessed. And today Jesus continues his sermon by addressing the crowd as you, and offering them words of both reassurance and challenge. And the you he addresses, it's important to remember this, is plural. It's not singular, it's plural. It is to be heard by us as not privately pious Christians, but as the body of Christ active in the world God so deeply loves, even if that active work is at sometimes risky. As Jesus continues, he uses the metaphors of salt and light. And like that second generation of Christians to whom Matthew was writing, we listen to with the crowd to hear that we too are the salt of the earth and the light of the world. One of the fascinating things I remember Evelyn Frost saying is she so eloquently talked about the existence of multiple types of salt. If we were to go out shopping for salt, we would find pink salt, black salt, gray, flaky, rock, crystals, iodized, and uniodized, just to name a few. Some salts are better used when cooking, while others are best as a finishing touch. Some salts are not edible but are used for chemical purposes, like melting ice on the roads in winter. Salt is something that is necessary for human life. And when we hear Matthew's gospel today, and remember that it was written for early Jewish Christians, it is really thought-provoking to note that some early Christian communities placed salt on the tongue of the newly baptized. I don't think that'd go over real well here, but that's what they did. Given the wide varieties of salt around the world, its culinary and chemical significance and its many uses, Jesus' comparison of believers to salt is even more meaningful. As Christians, one might say we are chemically the same through the work of the Spirit. However, we are called to different uses and work. And when we think about Jesus calling his followers light, we must remember light is not just the opposite of dark. The word light is also the opposite of heavy. In today's Old Testament reading, Isaiah calls Israel to a fast that is about reducing a certain kind of heaviness, the heaviness other people carry. The fast that God has chosen should lessen the burden and the heaviness of those who are oppressed. And as I think about this, I encourage you to come to the Sunday morning adult class that is about care and keeping of creation. We are called to lift the burden of climate change as much as we are able as we respond to that crisis. The earth is oppressed. The fast that God has chosen should lessen the heaviness and struggles of the poor, the widows, the orphans, the resident aliens among us, the most vulnerable, and all of those on the margins. Lighting the world as children of God should also involve lightening the weight of war, poverty, destruction, oppression, climate change, and division. Today's gospel reading epitomizes Matthew's understanding that the Christian movement built upon and perfected the righteousness prescribed in the Jewish commandments and the call of the prophets like Isaiah, from whom we heard this morning. When talking about Jesus' words to us today, Lutheran theologian and professor Barbara Lundblad connects Jesus' message to the words of the prophets before him when she writes, "For Jesus, salt and light came out of a long tradition of biblical teaching. Salt and light were images for the law of God. Salt and light must take us back to the fullness of the law and the prophets, and the fullness of Jesus' radical teaching in this Sermon on the Mount. The prophets plead for fullness of life, freedom from oppression, bread for the hungry, homes for those who have none, clothing for the naked. Is this not what it means to be the salt of the earth? To keep this prophetic word alive in the midst of our world? If we lose this vision, if we give in to other values, if we forget God's longing for justice, our salt has lost its taste. If you think Jesus' call is impossible, remember that the one who is our bread is with us and within us, empowering us to be salt and light in this world. Yes, this is the righteousness prescribed in the Jewish commandments and the call of the prophets, and it is the righteousness called forth in the kingdom of heaven in the inbreaking reign of God that happens among us. This is the righteousness Jesus proclaims as already here when transformation is taking place through him. The Christian community receives the call to be salt and light. Remember, it's plural. The you is plural. And this gospel message is about bringing transformation not only to our individual selves or the members of a specific church or faith community, but transformation to the entire world. Now, it's important to look again at Jesus' words to us. He says, you are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. And as pastor and theologian David Lowe says, Jesus isn't saying you should be the salt of the earth and the light of the world, or you have to be, let alone you better be. Rather, he is saying you are, as in already are, even if you don't know it. Even if you once knew it and forgot it. Even if you have a hard time believing it. Jesus is making to his disciples a promise about their very being, their identity. He is not commanding, let alone threatening them about what they should be doing, and what that's worth tarrying over. As so many in our congregations in the world experience God more like a divine lawmaker and rule enforcer than generous gift giver. In today's reading, Jesus is making promises and giving out gifts. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world, and this is, like Jesus' words that we heard last week, sheer blessing. And it is about identity, about our very being, which in turn leads to doing. It is all about living into the God-given identity we already have. I ask you to listen again to Jesus' words to us today as I read them from Eugene Peterson's translation, The Message. They're so beautiful. Listen as Jesus speaks to you. Let me tell you why you are here. You're here to be salt seasoning that brings out the God flavors of this earth. If you lose your saltiness, how will people taste godliness? You've lost your usefulness and will end up in the garbage. Here's another way to put it. You're here to be light, bringing out the God colors in the world. God is not a secret to be kept. We're going public with this, as public as a city on a hill. If I make you light bearers, you don't think I'm going to hide you under a bucket, do you? I'm putting you on a light stand. Now that I've put you there on a hilltop, on a light stand, shine. Keep open house. Be generous with your lives. By opening up to others, you will prompt people to open up with God, this generous God in heaven. As I think back to that time in the early 70s, I had no clue I'd be standing in this pulpit, for one thing. But as I think back to that day when I came here to Faith Lutheran Church and heard Evelyn Frost speak, I really realized she truly was salt seasoning, bringing out God flavors to all who listened. She was God's light bearer whose words brought transformation to my life. And as I think about my past 8 years with you, while preparing for retirement, you have been God's light bearers, and you have brought transformation to so many lives. I give thanks that you truly are a shining light in this community. As I prepare to leave, my prayer for you is that you will continue to keep open house and continue to be generous with your lives. I pray you will continue to faithfully open up to others, all others, and by doing this, prompt people to open up to God, the one who is so very generous to all and showers every one of us with overwhelming grace and love. I pray you will continue to shine the light of God's overwhelming, unconditional love for all people. Amen.